Good morning and welcome to our midweek meditation. Um, Over the past few weeks and going forward, these midweek meditations have been around conversations that we are having with members of our congregation here at Richmond Presbyterian Church. And these conversations are intended to help us to get to know one another better, especially in this time when we haven't been able to actually physically be with one another for many, many months now, going on to 8 months now. We've begun these conversations with our elders, members of our leadership team who are servant leaders. And today I'm really delighted to welcome into our conversation Janet Norris, one of our current elders. So Janet, hello, and thank you for joining us on our midweek meditation.
Yeah, good morning, Victor. Thank you for having me here.
It's a pleasure to chat with you. So why don't we begin by inviting you, Janet, to tell us a little bit about who you are, where you've come from, your family, maybe your family as you were growing up, your family as it is now, and sort of, what have you done in terms of work in your life? So tell us whatever you'd like to tell us about yourself.
All right. Well, I was born in Toronto, in Ontario. And at the age of 4, we moved to Ottawa. So I mostly grew up in Ottawa. I was born into a family. I was one of 5 children. I was the 4th out of 5. I have 2 older brothers, one older sister and a younger sister. My father was a Presbyterian minister, and as was his father and his grandfather. So there was a long line of Presbyterian ministers there. And I think on the other side of my dad was Arthur Curry, and his mother was also a daughter of a minister. It was a Methodist minister on that side. So there were lots of ministers. I think the generation stopped there. None of my family or none of my siblings have gone on in ministry, but that was a big part of my growing up. So my father was from Ontario and went to University of Toronto, Knox College, and he did his first job as a minister was in Rosetown, Saskatchewan, and that's where he met my mother. My mom was from Rosetown. She was a daughter of Scottish immigrants, and my mom was a teacher and very accomplished as a musician and an organist. So she was at the United Church in Rosetown, and my dad, they needed an organist at the Presbyterian Church. So apparently he kind of absconded her from the United Church, and that's how they got together, and then eventually moved back to Toronto, and the family grew from there. So growing up in Ottawa, I was active in church because, of course, being a minister's daughter, that was a big part of my growing up life. It was a good community in Ottawa, a nice neighborhood. We had also a family cottage. It's kind of an Ontario thing. People have cottages there to escape in the summer, and we had most of my summers there, and that was really fun. And it's continued to be fun for my kids and now grandchildren as well. My sister now owns the cottage with her husband, and they have made it into a year-round place that we get together as a family, which has been lovely. So growing up, I certainly was a big part of church. Church was a big part of my life, St. Andrew's Church in Ottawa, and I was active there in youth groups, and we had a handbell choir as a teenager. That was enjoyable, and I was part of that. I would say that being a minister's daughter can be a double-edged sword, and you can ask Jacob and Hannah about this too. In the 60s and 70s, maybe a little different, sort of expectations about how you should behave and what you should know and so on. And one story that came to mind was in grade 7, I had a teacher in elementary school, it was a public school, Mr. Hayes, I remember his name, and he was a Christian Scientist, and he used to send home questions that my dad should answer. So there were, I don't know, maybe theological questions or something that I didn't know the answers to, and so I would take these home to my dad, and I think he responded a couple of times, and then he says, well, no, I'm not, he didn't want to continue answering all these. And I said, well, Dad, you have to, I'll get in trouble if you don't do this. And I was, was concerned about it. I think probably my dad ended up speaking to the teacher about it. So I didn't have to continue bringing home these missives. But there's always that sort of a side to it, thinking that you have to live up to a certain level of expectation. But overall, I would say I was very, very fortunate to come from the family I did. I feel like I had a good childhood, lots of music as well in our home, bringing up, and that was something I've always enjoyed. Um, I took piano lessons and played the oboe in high school, and so, yeah, something that I've really enjoyed about church too, in terms of singing and worship. So moving to my present family, I'm married to Steve, and you'll be hearing from him. Steve is also an elder in our church. We've been married 16 plus years now, and we have what you call a blended family. We have actually two sons named Adam, so that makes our family kind of unusual. And I have also a son, Eric. So my Adam and Eric grew up in our church in RPC as well. Now the boys are all young adults. Adam Norris and his wife Lauren have a daughter, Jaden, our granddaughter, and we are expecting a new grandchild next week. So that's very exciting for us to look forward to. And another son, Adam, who has a girlfriend, Carissa, and they live in Surrey. And my youngest son, Eric, just got married last month to Rena, and they live in Vancouver. So lots of exciting events, despite 2020, in terms of marriages and babies and things coming up.
A memorable year in many ways.
Yes, yes. And so Steve and I live in Vancouver now. We did have a big house in Richmond, but we now are in Vancouver in a condo on False Creek here.
Yeah, you've got lovely views from that condo. I've been there.
Yeah.
I know that you worked as a counselor. And could you tell us a little bit more about the work that you've done and still do?
Yeah, yes. So leaving, after finishing high school in Ottawa, I went to Queen's University in Kingston, and I got a bachelor's degree in psychology. And then probably one of the biggest moves for me was coming to Vancouver. That was a big step up in my early 20s. And a big change point in my life, I think, in terms of my own growth and identity, and doing something that was stepping out, I guess. And I did a master's degree at UBC in counseling psychology. So that's how I started in that. And I've been really fortunate in my career. I feel very grateful that I chose that direction, and I've really enjoyed my years as a counselor. I worked at Langara College for 5 years. And then I was at Douglas College for 29 years and retired from there 3 years ago, and now have a private practice where I do personal counseling, and we'll talk about the pandemic at the end here, but interestingly, I now do all of my private practice on Zoom, and I have clients in different provinces, and so that's really changed this year as well. But really grateful for the career that I've had.
Thank you. So growing up as a child of the manse, as they call children of ministers, how did you end up at Richmond Presbyterian Church? I mean, you said you came out here to Vancouver and you did some further studies, but how did you end up at Richmond Church? Were you just a good young adult Presbyterian who said, wherever I go, I better look for the nearest Presbyterian church?
Well, I would have to say I had a gap there. I think part of moving here, I wasn't really as involved in church. I think that was a time in my 20s where I wouldn't say, I just sort of fell away from it. It wasn't as big a part of my life at that time. I was focusing on other things. So I really wasn't an active member at any church, for a period of time there. And in my early 30s, I got married in my later 20s. And when my children were born, when Adam and Eric were born, I then felt very drawn to want to be back in part of a church community. I think that was a real impetus to go back. I was living in Richmond at that time. I started out at South Arm United Church. I went a little bit to there. And then my parents would come out to visit from Ottawa. My dad was good friends with Tony Plump. Okay. And my mom had an unfortunate accident when they were visiting us. She had a fall. A dog jumped on her. We were out for a walk, and she just fell and broke a hip. And she ended up in Richmond Hospital. And Pat McKendrick was one of the visitors who came to the hospital. I think she told Tony about it, and probably my dad was in touch with Tony too. Anyway, they came to the hospital. They visited her. I think I was there at the time, and I was just really, sort of impressed and touched by their caring and concern for her. And so I started attending, I think it was about 1991, started attending RPC, and really enjoyed that. My kids were involved there. One thing I really appreciated was that Graham would invite people to come for the choir at Christmas, Christmas time. And at that time I was very busy with work and kids, but I really appreciated that and really enjoyed being part of the choir at that time. And my sister, Sheila, my younger sister, lived in Richmond for a time, and she also was part of that. So that was fun. So the choir was great. Yeah.
Well, I know you still are a part of our choir, and we appreciate all of the times that you sing with our choir, and I know that continues to be a big part of your faith life. You also, with Steve, are the ones that sort of coordinate our hiking ministry, we want to call it that, and that over the years you've been taking out little groups to various parts here in the Lower Mainland for these hikes, and I know that many people appreciate that ministry, and I suppose never more than in these days where, getting together is really difficult. So thank you for your leadership in that area. Tell us a little bit about your sense of call to be an elder and how that all came about.
Well, it's I think a fair bit of history to that too. I think initially I was approached about 20 years ago, actually. I recall that it was Mary Hansen and Vi Mar, and they came to visit me at my home, and I was I was touched by that. I was impressed, and they were encouraging me to consider it. That wasn't a good time in my life in terms of committing to a leadership role. I was going through a difficult time. I was going through a divorce, and just a harder time. But it stayed in my mind, and then at a later date in 2007, I was asked again. That was a different time in my life, and I was able to respond to the call, then wanting to be part of leadership. I had been part of a lay pastor program in our church at that time. And so, yeah, I thought that was something that I could be involved in. I was for about 6 years. Again, there were some challenges for me near the end. My parents had moved to Victoria, and they were ill. My mom had Alzheimer's. My dad was struggling to be a caregiver there. I had issues, full-time work, kids, and so that was a time when I just didn't continue after the 6-year term. So then, Victor, you came to our congregation, and I'm very grateful for that, and really, felt very supportive of your ministry, and I felt encouraged I was asked, again, to be part of the eldership. I think I struggled a little bit this time. I think partly because of our greater church was having issues, like struggling to deal with issues around LGBTQ persons and marriage and ordination around that. My work at Douglas College, I worked a lot with students, dealing with a lot of personal issues, many related to sexual orientation, gender identity, and really seeing the struggles of students through that in terms of difficulties with family, with relationships, with being accepted. And I had a pause about that. Being an elder, I thought, well, I really would like to feel our denomination is supportive and caring for this group as well. But having said that, I also feel very supportive of the ministry of our church and hope that we'll work through that issue, and very supportive of your ministry. So really happy to be part of a leadership team working together in our congregation.
Thank you, and thank you for that concern for the broader inclusiveness of all people. And so we look forward to discerning all of this together. Speaking of faith, you've spoken about how you've come from a family of a long tradition of ministers, but are there people, is there one person who may have impacted your faith the most as you now sort of reflect back on this? It may not necessarily be the obvious people, but is there someone who may have impact that for you stands out a little bit, saying, this was a really important person for my faith development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think at different parts of my life, I would answer that differently. Certainly my parents, you know, they were, and both my mom and dad in terms of their life, and even in retirement, so that they did pastoral care and visiting. My parents were both very loving people, very humble, and they're very committed to living out, I think, their faith in ways. So I think that generally has been a strong influence. I think certainly Tony Plomp, you know, initially coming here was very influential in my faith formation. And many of the members of our congregation, I don't know if I can just highlight some, I would say Weimar, you know, I really was inspired by her. She was very kind to our family too. She would hire my sons to do yard work. She and George would hire them. I think that's a tradition in our church, but very kind, very loving, very dedicated woman. I found her very inspirational, and yeah, and many others, I think, and just in terms of the community. And I think there's such a wonderful feeling when you were in a Christian community that we have here, how it's growing, expanding, becoming more diversified. That's very inspiring too, to be part of our community, our church community.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people, I think we don't recognize the impact that we actually have on others. It's good to know that there are people that we can, you know, I mean, many people play a part, of course, but every once in a while there are these names that come up over and over again within the history of RPC, and certainly Weimar is one of those people. Mm-hmm. You've touched a little bit about this in terms of your work as a counselor, but given this current pandemic and what it's meant for so many of us, especially around possibly areas around mental health, did you want to touch a little bit about your experience and what you're seeing out there without divulging confidence, but are you seeing people really struggling with the pandemic in terms of our mental health, and what do you do in terms of trying to support or encourage people that are maybe struggling with the pandemic at that sort of level?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. I'm thinking of and under ordinary times, I'm working with people dealing with anxiety or depression and relationship issues, and I try to work with them now, saying, you know, here's our baseline of anxiety. It's not down here, it's up here. You know, so I think that for all of us, and I would say, you know, myself included, in terms of wondering, like, why am I not as focused? Why am I not as motivated at times? And I think just having that self-compassion to realize that these are tough times, that people are more isolated, you know, from the usual connections, a sense of anxiety and worry about when is it going to end, and the virus. So I think that is an underlying thread that I'm seeing with, I would say, all the clients I'm working with, but also just in terms of family and friends and heightened anxiety. So I think it's just good to be aware of that. And looking at how do you develop habits that are anchoring in your life. And I think that's one thing about the walks outside, you know, looking at what can we do and being out in nature, like having a regular routine a day when you're getting out and connecting with nature, and maybe having less expectation that you should be doing all the same things the same way, and just having that feeling that, yeah, this is a tough time, let's take care of each other through this in ways that we can. Just a note on that, Victor, is the term Zoom wasn't in my vocabulary. And you actually were the first one that introduced that idea. I think it was back in January, which seems like a long time ago. There was a snowy day, and you and I think Graham and I were going to have a meeting, and it was snowy, and you said, "Oh, I'll send you a Zoom invitation." I thought, "Oh, what's that?" You know, and you were going to send us the link. So that was very sort of foreshadowing what was to come after that. That our lives would then you know, move to Zoom, and in many ways, in terms of my private practice, but also in terms of our congregational meetings and so on. I'm very grateful, Victor, for your ability to sort of adapt and to help to move us along through that. So thank you so much for your flexibility and adaptability, and how do we grow as a church and as a community in the ways that we can right now.
Well, I certainly have tons of support from the other staff members and volunteers and certainly from our session, people like you. So thank you for that.
Mm.
There's so much that I think we're going to be coming out of this pandemic at some point with a lot of different knowledge and a lot of opportunity to broaden again, to expand our reach in terms of who might feel part of this community. And I think our work on Zoom, our work on live streaming, all of these things are no longer just sort of a temporary measure to sort of get us through the pandemic, but rather we are developing new facets of ministry that open up possibilities as we go forward, even after we get back together. So let me kind of finish by drawing us back to that idea. At some point, this pandemic will subside, and some of the restrictions that we have now will be lifted. It may take a long time. It may take longer than we might expect in terms of all of the restrictions to be lifted, even after a vaccine is produced. But what are you most looking forward to once some of these restrictions are lifted? What are you most looking forward to?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly in terms of our church community, I'm very much looking forward to meeting in person and to having those personal connections again. I think that'll be wonderful. It'll be wonderful to be able to sing together, to be part of. I really miss that, and I think some of the previous interviews, I know Rhonda spoke to that, and Mary Hansen about singing as part of a group, and what a wonderful part of worship that is. And on a more family or personal level, I really do greatly miss my being with my kids a lot, with my extended family, and look forward to traveling again with Steve. We had many travel plans in the last year that have been on hold as part of our retirement lifestyle, but so looking forward to that as well.
Okay. Well, we certainly look forward to getting all back together, but in the meantime, we'll continue to be in touch in as many ways as possible. I just want to thank you, Janet, for taking time to be in conversation with us this morning. And I trust that many of our church members will be able to just watch this and get a better sense of who you are, your past, your present, and just kind of your gifts. So thanks for joining us for this conversation. I want to let everybody know that just as we finish here, Jannie, our music director, will be presenting a musical meditation for us to focus on as we finish our midweek meditation this week. Next week, I just want to let you know I'll be having this conversation with Graham, our clerk of session, our recently retired music director. And Graham will also be playing the organ next week as part of our musical meditation as well. And then the week after that, it's going to be Steve. And I'll be able to quiz Steve to make sure that he knows all of the same things that you know. It'll be kind of like the newlywed game, right?
Right.
Anyway, good to be with you, Janet. Can I just say a quick prayer as we finish?
Thank you.
Gracious God, we thank you for our time today with Janet. We thank you for families of faith, those families that shape us and equip us, and most of all, love us, and for the examples that they set in our lives, and for how those examples and how that love shapes us through generations. So we thank you for Janet, for her family that has shaped her, and for the families that she now shapes, and for the family of Richmond Church, which she as an elder has a big role in shaping and leading and guiding and serving. Be with all of us as we continue to navigate through this pandemic. And we pray especially for those who are anxious about the pandemic, who are maybe struggling with issues around anxiety and depression. And so we ask for your healing for those who are struggling with mental health challenges. And we ask for your Spirit's peace, guidance, and clarity in this time for all of us together. Hear our prayers, for we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Janet, wonderful to be with you. I wish you a wonderful day. Take care.
You too. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.